The second pair. Okay. Moving on 20.
21A.
Oh, you want coffee? Okay. Okay, I got it. Popped up right here?
Yeah. Okay. We left off yesterday on 21A. The Gemara was talking about what if I mix two materials? So we had a list in the Mishnah of wicks and oils that you cannot use. What if I drop a little bit of good oil into a larger cup of oil that's on the bad list? In general, the assumption is that the oils that the Mishnah says you can't use are because they won't burn as well, they won't be drawn up into the wick. So what if I add a little good oil? Will that allow sort of serve as a conduit for the bad oil to be drawn up into the wick? That was the question that Abaye had asked Rabbah. 5, 10, 15, about 18 lines down from the top of 21A. Excuse me. So that's what Abaye had asked Rabbah. The list of oils that the Mishnah says you may not use. What if I put a little good oil? May I then light that candle? So the assumption is, yeah, that should be fine. The problem is, did the rabbis make a rule that in order to prevent people from using the bad oils on their own, we're going to say don't even use the bad oils at all, even if they're mixed with the good oils? Or was there no such edict? Was there no such gzeira from the Chacham?
That oil.
Yeah, right. Meaning, and it seems that that issue would be solved if I mixed some good oil in. The issue is, did the Chachamim say don't even use any bad oil as a gzeira, as a fence around the problem of using only bad oil? Oh, there's something like inherently wrong with it. Right. Yes, yes, right. I guess bad is a bad adjective, right?
Yeah.
It's not like morally bad, right?
Yeah.
Right. Insufficient. Yeah. Amarle, so Rabbah had answered, Ain madlikin, don't use the bad oils at all, even if they're mixed with some good oil. My time out the fish madlikin, because you're not allowed to use them when they're on their own, so you're not allowed to use them even mixed with some other oils. Okay, so the question that we had was, Esve, I'm assuming Abaye is asking this question. Karach davar shemadlikin bo al davar she'ein madlikin bo, ein madlikin bo. If you wrap a material which you may use as a wick around a material that you may not use, so the assumed position, the Tana Kama, the first Tana here in the Brisa, says you may not use that. So it seems that you cannot mix good material with material that's not recommended. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, "Shel beis Abba hayu korchin psila al gabe egos madlikin." That at my father's house, at Rabbi Gamliel's house, they would usually wrap a wick, meaning a recommended wick, around a walnut, and they would dunk that into a cup of oil, and they would light that Friday night. Okay, so we have two opinions. We have the assumed position, the Tanakama, who says don't use a mixture of wicks from the recommended list and from the not recommended list. That would be like Rabba's answer to Abaye, and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who says, at my father's house, we did use a mixture of recommended and not recommended. So the Gemara takes this as a question on Rabbah, who said that you cannot use it because look, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, he said in his father's house they did use it, but you're skipping the first opinion, who was like Rabbah. Katani miyas madlikin. You see that you do use it. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's father used it. What do you mean? Amarle adamos visli mid Rabbi Shimon Gamliel sayinu mid Tanakam. Instead of asking a question from Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's opinion, which is not like me, maybe use the first opinion as a proof to what I was saying, because the first opinion, the Tanakama says that you may not use it, exactly like I said. Holo kasha maisa rav. That's not difficult. The story from the rabbi's house, meaning when you have two opinions and one was based in practical halacha and one was based on theory, we side with the opinion of that's based on practical halacha. What Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's father did, yes, right, yeah. So the question is, right, meaning in general, we tend to side with the Tanakama, with the assumed position, because it's just that, it's the assumed position. Meaning if I'm giving you two opinions about something, and one I say without citing any sources, I don't say he thinks A, B, and C. I just say the halacha is A, B, and C. That rabbi, he thinks the E and F. Then what am I telling? I'm telling you that the majority or the assumed position is A, and this particular rabbi happens to disagree. Why do we mention opinions that are in the minority that we don't rule like? That the Mishnah in Tractate Aviot, uh, um, the Mishnah brings that subject, and it says because there could be that there will be courts in the future where you'll have a majority who will side with the minority opinion from the earlier generation, and that's okay. If there would be no earlier minority opinion, then we would question the later court's majority opinion as having no source in earlier halacha. But if you have a minority opinion from generation A, and then in generation M, you have a majority of the court who think, you know what, he got it right, then they would be allowed to side with him. That's what the Mishnah says in Adios. That's why Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, editing the Mishnayos, includes all of these minority opinions. Aside from the fact that it's you fulfill it's studying Torah, even when you study the opinions that we don't rule like. Exactly. Yes. The majority opinion can base their opinion on the precedent of the minority, even though the minority opinion wasn't ruled like at the time. Exactly. That's why even today, Lahavdil, the Supreme Court, you'll have the dissent, even if it's only one justice. It's 8-1. The minority will write his or her dissenting opinion. Why? So that it's studied in law school. In the future, someone will take that dissent and say, you know what, they got it right. So, but here, what do you have? Okay, so that's in general. In general, we have the Tanakama, the assumed position, and so and so, the named position, meaning it's probably only him, thinks X. In that case, we usually pass on like the Tanakama, unless it's one of like the rabbis where we know we always pass on like them, like Rabbi Akiva or someone like that. In general, we pass on like Rabbi Akiva 9 times out of 10 against his interlocutors, the ones who he's arguing. Okay. So here we're assuming that Reb Shimon Gamliel's opinion is the correct, or whatever, the one that we're going to ask from. Rabbah had told Abaye, you cannot mix two materials. The one from the recommended list, one from the not recommended. Abaye says, for Shimon Gamliel's family, that's what they did. The fact that the assumed position was like you, that you cannot mix the two materials, is irrelevant because you see that in Rabbi Gamliel's family, this is what they did. It's very interesting. So, in general, the Gemara actually has a debate in Maseches Baba Basra. If someone, what is better, halacha or Ma'aseh Rav? If someone can say, the rabbis, they voted and they came to this opinion, but it's not based on we don't know of anyone who actually ruled this way in a practical case. Theoretically, were this case to come before us, this is how we voted. This is what the majority said. Versus, I know that in the court of Rabbi Yosef, this case came before them, and that's how he ruled, or something like that. Which one is better, the theory or the practice? So that's machlokas in the Gemara. The reason why you would prefer the theoretical ruling over the practical ruling is because, and you see this all the time, someone can see the rabbi doing X and get it completely wrong, not understand the context, not understand that there's some other circumstance that led him to rule strictly or leniently or whatever it is, right? Unless you know that this is what he always does every day or every Shabbat or something like that, it's very difficult to see a rabbi do one thing in one snapshot of time and say, aha, the halacha is like this. And even though the court ruled that theoretically this is how the majority rules, I'm going to go with what I saw this rabbi do. So, don't tell me this isn't kosher. I saw the rabbi do this and this. All right, well, maybe he was, in great stomach pain and there were other circumstances. So, but here you have to say that, I guess this was a practice that Rabbi Gamliel did every week. He would wrap the walnut with the wicks, and therefore that serves as the strong opinion here that Abai is using to ask on Rabbah. Okay, so that's where we left off yesterday. Mikom makom kasha. At the end of the day, it's difficult how to reconcile Rabbah's opinion that you may not mix the two materials with the practice of Rabbi Gamliel's family, where they would wrap the walnut with the wick. Okay. My lav lehadlik, was it not done to light these two things together, the walnut with the wick? Lo lichakfos, which Rashi translates as to make it float. So Rabbi Gamliel was not lighting the walnut and the wick, he was lighting the wick. He used the walnut to keep the wick afloat. So it has no the walnut, yeah. Or I guess the top. I don't know. Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah, I guess. Right. It wasn't like, on the top of the island, like the palm tree. I guess it went into the body of the liquid. So Abaya's question was, can you mix two materials? Can I wrap cotton around seaweed, make a wick, meaning I'm using one material to thicken the wick, but I have materials from the not recommended list in this wick. May I light that on Shabbos? That was Abaya's question. Rabbah said, no, you may not, because of Gzeira. The Chachamim are afraid that if people see, oh, I'm using seaweed, they don't know that you're only allowed to use the seaweed because you're mixing it with the cotton. They'll think that you're always allowed to use the seaweed, and they'll come next week to just use the seaweed. The Abaya had said, wait a second, in Rabbi Gamliel's house, they would wrap a walnut with the wick. That's two materials, one from the recommended list and one that you cannot use as a kosher wick for Shabbos candles. To that, the Gemara is saying they never lit the walnut. They used the walnut to float the wick. Okay, the problem is that there was a recorded opinion that said that you can't do that. Ila hakfos, if the whole point of the walnut was just to make the wick float, my time at the Tanakama, what would be the reasoning behind the assumed position in the Brisa? Before we got to Rav Shimon Gamliel's opinion, the Tanakama had said, Ein madlikin bo, you may not use the mixture of two materials to light. Well, if we're saying that the whole point is not because I'm lighting the seaweed and the cotton, I'm just lighting the cotton on top of the walnut, then what would be the rationale for the Tanakama who says it's not okay? So the Gemara says, you're right. Hula Rav Shimon Gamliel, the Brisa is not, the structure of the Brisa is not assumed position, Tanakama, unnamed, majority view, that says that you may not use it, followed by story. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, at Dad's house, we always used it, which is the structure of the Brisa that we have until now. Anytime you have an assumed position where it's unnamed, we're assuming that it's the assumed position. We're assuming that it's the Tanakama, but it could really just be the opinion of Rabbi Gamliel, the named person himself, and we just don't remember the structure of how to word it. So here it goes. The full brisa is one view. It's the view of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. There are no two opinions here. There's a gap in the text, and you have to read it as follows. If you wrap a material which you may light around a material which you may not use as a wick, don't light it on Shabbos. When is this true? Lehadlik, if I'm trying to kindle both materials, like the example I gave, the cotton around the seaweed. But if the whole point of the not recommended material is just to keep the recommended material afloat, mutar, that's okay. Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer, because we know that Reb Shimon Gamliel said, Shel beis Abba hayu korchen psila gabe egos. At my father's house, they would wrap a wick around the walnut. Okay, so it's really one view. And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is saying this very distinction. If I'm lighting both materials, then it's not okay. The Chachamim made it Gezerah, they made a fence. They said, don't use the seaweed at all, lest next week you come to use the seaweed alone. But if the whole purpose of the material that's from the not recommended list is only to allow the good wick, the recommended wick, to stay afloat, then that's okay. And in the old days, I don't know if I mean they still sell them, the floating wicks for Hanukkah or for Shabbos. So it's a little piece of material. Cork, exactly. That's what it is. Right. It's cork with like a little foil or something on top that will allow the wick to float. And then you put the wick in the middle or something, and that keeps it afloat on the oil so that the wick doesn't sink to the bottom. So you're using two materials, one good, one that is not recommended. No, there the cork is only used as a floating device to keep the wick from sinking. Yes.
One is a fence and one is a decree.
Right. So Geder means fence. Gader mizeh, Gader mizeh. The pasuk says with Bilam's donkey, there was a wall on each side. Gezerah is ligzor, to decree or to forbid. But the reason why, right? I'm using, I guess, a metaphor that the reason why the Chachamim have what gives the Chachamim the authority to tell me not to do something? Exactly. So the Torah says don't eat meat and milk. The rabbis say, but if we allow them to have chicken parmesan, then the next day they're going to put the meat in the chicken parmesan. So no chicken with milk. They can't. So that's a fence around the pit, which is the avera, right? The pasuk says, "Ushmartem es mishmarti," guard my gardens, guard my prohibitions, my averos. So that's Masil Sharm points out that's an obligation for everyone. So if I know the Chachamim made rules around what they think a good chunk of the Jews, a significant minority of Jews, would have a problem sometime throughout their life with mixing chicken and milk. So no Jews may have chicken and milk. Let's say I have a problem whenever I walk down, 43rd Street, there's this great non-kosher bakery and the smell is just amazing. And I always have a problem. I always go in, or I sometimes go in. So the Chachamim will not say all Jews may not walk down 43rd Street. But Yehuda has to say, Yehuda can't walk down 43rd Street because I have to make a fence around the Torah, just like the rabbis have to make a fence around the Torah. The rabbis are just stepping in to make public policy if they think that there's a significant chunk of Jews who will have this problem, who will stumble about this particular avera, like mixing chicken and milk. Excuse me? Yeah. But every Jew has an obligation to make a fence around things that they if you see you have a problem with whatever, then you should think about how can I avoid getting into the position where we pray every morning that God should not lead us into to be tempted. Of lowly de nisayon, don't bring us to be tested. Being tested is the only way we get reward, right? If I don't have any draw when I'm walking by the McDonald's to go in and have something not kosher, I don't get credit for not eating something not kosher. I get credit for the mitzvahs I do, putting the tefillin, saying Shema. I'll get credit when I have a temptation to sin and I don't sin, but like, oh, I'm not killing now, so I keep racking up points in heaven because I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. I'm not swearing falsely, I'm not bowing to idols. You keep on getting credit for. No, it's only when you have a temptation you avoid it. So, a person who knows that they have an issue with whatever it is, they should make a fence around that avera. The Chachamim make the Gzeira. Their position is for public policy that we think that there's a significant chance that Jews will fall into this problem, like let's say chicken milk, and so they make this Gzeira. So here in this case, we think that if people are allowed to light two materials, one from the recommended list and one from the not recommended list, then it's confusing enough The daughter sees her mother light with the seaweed. She always wrapped the seaweed around the cotton. This week, I can't find any cotton. I'll put the seaweed in the oil and I'll light that. So in order to prevent that, the rabbi said, don't use any of the two materials. However, if you're using the cork or the walnut just to allow the wick to float, then that's fine.
Not recommended, with all the things that are not on the recommended list are therefore deemed to be on the not recommended.
The reverse. Our Mishnah is the list of the not recommended, and everything else is fine. Yeah, I mean, if it's a wick, again, like the Gemara said, you can't use the bark. The bark's not a wick. So right, of materials from which you might think to make a wick, the not recommended list is the Mishnah, and everything else is fine. Yeah. Okay, why? Mm,
Kindle. And I don't know if the second part is additional offense or just
yeah, yeah. So, the Gemara is about to discuss something along those lines. So let's wait till we get there, and then we could figure that out. See if the Gemara addresses that. Amy, is this true that you may use the two materials if one is to allow the other one to float, only to assist the other one, and you may not if you're lighting both? The Ha'amar Rav Bruna Amar Rav. Rav Bruna said in the name of Rav, Chelev mehutach v'kirvei dagim shenimochu. If you're not eating that, the melted tallow fat and fish innards that melted, that dissolved into some liquefied form. Adam nosin tocho shemen kolshehu umadlik. I have this liquefied fish innards, and I say, great, I'm going to use them for my Shabbos candles, and it's going to smell great, and I'm gonna I assume it'll be bad. I was being sarcastic, and I'll put some oil into as long as you put some good oil into the liquefied fish innards, you've koshered it. That's now fine. Wait a second. We just said before that you can't use if you're lighting the two materials, one from the recommended list, one from the not recommended list. That's no good. Yes. Right.
You have to get to a majority.
So no. Well, the question was, if I have a majority. Abaya's question was, if I have a majority of oil from the not recommended list, can I put a little bit of oil from the recommended list, and will that make it okay? Because that will serve as a conduit, a bridge to allow the oil to be absorbed into the wick. Rabba said no. You're saying, what you're suggesting is, well, what if I have a majority of the good oil? Will that be okay? Because now that will nullify the bad oil. I don't know. On the one hand, you would argue, sure, I mean, it can't be any worse than milk in the chicken soup, which at some point becomes nullified and it's okay. Right. Well, the shishim is rabbinic. According to the Torah, as long as it's 50.1, that's okay. The rabbis added that it has to be 1 in 60. Or for truma, it has to be 1 in 100. Different levels for different halachos. On the other hand, if this is a gzeira, you could argue that the gzeira was made across the board. Don't use any bad materials because we don't want you getting the wrong idea that you'd be able to use the bad materials. And the daughter is not exactly measuring whether the mom's using 49% fish innards or 51% fish innards.
So we think we'll dilute it down by 49%.
Yeah, I think so. You meaning dilute with water or with a bad with? I think that would be the same question. I think that would be the same question. You mean nobody knows? Yeah. Oh, you're saying which way I? Oh. I see. Right. It could be. So again, the question is that here we're saying that you're allowed to put a little bit of recommended oil into the liquefied fish innards and use that to light Friday night. we just got finished saying that if you're lighting two materials and one of them is from the not recommended list, then that's no good. So the Gemara answers the first white line, medium line. Hani mimshachi be'einayu, v'hani lo mimshachi be'einayu. The gazru rabbanan al chayav mehutach mishum chayav she'ein mehutach. V'al kirvei dagim shani mochu mishum kirvei dagim shalani mochu. The fish innards, when they're liquefied, are technically fine. They will be drawn up into the wick. The whole reason why liquefied fish innards are on the not recommended list is itself a gzera because you may come to use non-liquefied fish innards. The chelev mehutach, the tallow that's been melted, is not allowed. Why? Because you may come to use the regular fat that's not melted. So, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Adam made a point before. When the Chachamim say that you can make a gzera, you can only make one gzera. You have one shot. You cannot make a gzera upon a gzera. For example, okay, I can't think of an example. This would be an example. The Chachamim said you may not use the fat itself, the chalev itself. Doesn't get absorbed into the wick. Because that's true, don't even use the melted fat, which technically does get absorbed into the wick because we're afraid you're going to use the non-melted fats. Yes. So now even when you have the melted fat, don't mix in the good oil. That would be a step before that. That would be a gzera to a gzera. There would be a fence in front of a fence. And that the Chachamim do not have the authority to do. And so that's why you can't, once you're at the stage where it's melted fat, where it's the liquefied fish innards, then you may mix some good oil in with that. Because in the first place, the melted fat was only a gzera. So now, yeah.
That's its own step one gzera against something else that's even worse.
Right.
And it's not doing it from beef tallow and beef fat. They're doing a new gzera on fish, melted fish innards, because there's something else they're trying to prevent. They're making this into a new first order gzera rather than a new second order gzera from the beef tallow and the beef innard.
Hypothetically, that would be fine, but what would that gzera be? Meaning, don't use the melted fat because. Oh, you're right. Then that would be a first order gzera, as you're saying. Right. So.
But I would allow this second order gzera.
No, so meaning this is the Gemara's asking a question. You just told me I can't use the seaweed wrapped with cotton because I can't light two materials, because next week someone may like the seaweed alone. So then how can I mix good oil in the liquefied fish innards? Isn't that the same thing as using seaweed wrapped with cotton? Two materials, one from the recommended list, one from the not recommended list. The Gemara says the melted fat is not itself from the not recommended list. It's a fence so that you don't come to use something from the not recommended list. Really, what we don't want you to use is the fat itself when it's gelled, when it's not melted. So the Chachamim say don't even use the fat when it's melted. But if I'm going to use mix good oil together with the melted fat, then that would be two steps before the problem. That would be a gzera on top of a gzera. Now, what Adam's asking is that the whole list of not recommended oils and fats is itself a gzera, so that you don't come to tilt the fire. So this is really a triplicate gzera, and all this gzera in the first place that Rabbah was saying not to use the seaweed wrapped with cotton should itself be a gzera on top of a gzera, right? That was your question.
Reading Shabbat night, Friday night by candlelight, and actually subconsciously came to adjust the candle even though he knew he couldn't.
Yeah, so that would be even when the light is fine, when it's proper lips, right? You can't read by the candlelight, right? Right.
Yes, he did.
Yes.
But
Right.
unconscious,
Right. So that's even when you have everything's fine, from the recommended list. Yeah.
which is why we recommended not this is because of that problem.
It's well, even if you're not reading, right? Meaning reading is a particular problem because you're so up close to the fire and you're engaged in something that's absorbing your attention, and you may come to fiddle with the candle. So, where are we here?
That's just general, like.
Yes, yes. Um, so again, so let's start from the Gemara's answer. Hani mimshachi, but again, the question is, if I can't use seaweed and cotton, then I shouldn't be able to use melted fat with oil. So to that, the Gemara says, Hani, the melted fat and the liquefied fish innards, mimshchi be'einayu, they themselves will be drawn up into the wick on their own without any mixture of oil. The honey, the other oils on the list, or the seaweed, or whatever it is, lo mimshchi be'einayu, they will not be sufficient lights on their own. Therefore, v'gazru rabbanan al chelav mehutach, the rabbis decree that you may not use even the melted fat, which technically would be drawn after the wick. And they said you cannot use that on Shabbos mishum chelev she'ena mahutach, because of the fat that is not melted. Ve'al kirvei dagim shenimochu mishum kirvei dagim shel lo nimochu. And the fish innards that are liquefied, which would be good on their own, hypothetically, because you may come to use the ones that are not liquefied. So since all of these are only the melted fat and the liquefied fish innards are themselves only forbidden because of Xera, they allowed them to be used as long as you mix in some good oil. But the other oils in the Mishnah, since they themselves would not work, they would not be drawn onto the wick, you cannot kasher them, so to speak, by you cannot kasher them by mixing in some good oil. So to that, the Gemara asks, why don't I make a new rule and say that the oils, that the melted fat or the liquefied fish innards, I cannot use on Shabbos together with good oil? Mishum because you may come to use the melted fat or the liquefied fish innards, which you did not kasher with the good oil. No, that itself, that you cannot use the melted fat, is itself only Xera va'anan, and we should nekum get up if it needs or Xera and make a decree so that you don't come to violate the decree. That you can't do. Okay. So Tosfos asked your question, Adam, on like in another 2 pages, 23b, and Tosfos says that here we go. That this is I would call like a high percentage Xera. I don't know what the percentage, if I was allowed to have meat and milk, what the percentage would be that we would come to eat chicken and milk. But the insufficient oils, the oils from the not recommended list, are so bad that it's almost definite that a significant percentage of the population will come to tilt the candle. And so usually we say that you can't. Well, here, let's start from the beginning. Why can't the rabbis make a Xera on a Xera? If they think that there's a sufficient a sufficient concern that by using the where are we? The melted fat with the oil, that you'll then come to use non-melted fat with oil, which you'll then come to use melted fat on its own, which will then come to, and if you do that, then you'll come to tilt the candle on Shabbos. Like, why not? If they think there's a significant concern, then make the Xer. What's the problem? They could tell me not to do A, they could tell me not to do B. So their authority to make decrees to prevent you from doing something, to forbid you from taking an action, from eating the chicken parmesan, is why? Because the Torah says, "Ushmartem is mishmarti," make a fence, make a guard around my prohibitions. Okay, like I said, that's personal and public. You cannot make a fence, or they're not entitled, they don't have the authority to make a fence around their own mitzvos, meaning the entire authority that they're relying on to tell me not to do something is because Hashem said, make a fence around my pit, my prohibition. If the Chachamim say you can't have chicken with milk, okay, that's a problem. Hashem says to listen to the rabbis. But they can't then say, and it's so important not to eat chicken with milk that we're going to make a fence around our what's your prohibition? You don't have a prohibition. You have a fence. You can tell us to avoid A so that we don't come to do the Avera, the real problem, which is what the Torah says. But to avoid doing what you say, that you don't have an authority to do. You can make a mishmaris limishmarti to my Averos, not yours, right? So there's a subject for a larger conversation, but you can break down the different dirabanans, the different rabbinic prohibitions or mitzvos into, the Rambam categorizes them into three groups. You have gzeirot, the prohibitions, fences around what the Torah says not to do. So don't eat chicken and milk because you may come to have them eaten. Then you have a mitzvah, like washing your hands before bread, or making an eruv, lighting Hanukkah candles, reading the Megillah, the fasts, Tisha B'Av, etc. Then you have rabbinic customs. So I don't mean custom like this Hasidic Rebbe sings this before the soup or after the soup. I mean the customs like Hoshanos outside the Beis Hamikdash, or Hallel on Rosh Chodesh is a custom. So these are customs from, from way back, from the times of the Mishnah, the times of the Sanhedrin. Okay. And they're different. And then you have rabbinic interpretations of biblical law. So the whole Gemara, Yud Gimel Midah Shatan Reshes Ben, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, B'Shloshes Midah Shatan Reshes Ben. There are 13 ways of interpreting the Torah into a usable text, right? It's almost like when you have a word search. So you have a whole jumble of letters, and then find words. You can go horizontal, vertical, diagonal, backwards, forwards. Like there are rules of how you're allowed to find the words. You can't make up your every third letter, or you can have whatever rules you want. So Lavdil, you have the Torah. I can't turn this into a usable document. The Torah says sit in a sukkah. What's a sukkah? What does sit mean? Et cetera, et cetera. Everything that, you have a whole tractate of sukkah to discuss. You can't use it as a usable document unless you have the 13 methods that Hashem gave to Moshe of how to interpret the document into a usable, workable, practical guide. That's what the Chachamim do. That's what the whole Gemara is, using Kal V'chomer, Psei Rashava, Hekesh, Mamatzinu, all Klal Pradu Klal, all these rules of how to interpret, how to read practical law, derive practical law from the psukim of the Torah. That, even though the rabbi is the one who interpreted the pasuk, the law that they then discovered is a Torah level law. So that's all deoraisa. That Hashem says at the end of the book of Devarim, lo sasur, don't veer from what the rabbi tells you, neither to the right nor to the left. What is that referring to? Is that referring to when the rabbi interprets the Torah in the high court? There was 71 judges sitting in the Beis Hamikdash. They're interpreting the Torah all day. When they do that, that then becomes Torah law. That's what the Ramban says. When it says don't veer from what the rabbi tells you, it means when they tell you that this is how to interpret this pasuk, take them at their word. They have the authority to do that. It becomes Torah level law. The Rambam says not only does it mean that, it also means if they tell you don't eat chicken and milk to avoid falling into this pit, or they tell you we think that for the following values, it's important for you to light candles on Hanukkah or read the Megillah on Purim, then that also becomes something that God says you have to do. Okay, our time's up, but that leads to a whole discussion back and forth between the Rambam and the Ramban. Well, if Hashem is telling you to listen to the rabbi who told you to light Hanukkah candles, then doesn't Hanukkah candles itself become a Torah law? To be continued. All right, thank you.